when you feel anxious, it's your body telling you something in advance. It's saying, let's say we're feeling anxious about a pitch, right? You're pitching for an investor for your company and you're feeling anxious about it. Totally normal. But what is that anxiety telling you? Is it saying, let's go over those figures one more time? Is it saying, let's go for that walk in the park before we go in? Is it saying, this is really important to me, and so I'm going to make sure I do everything I can in order to be prepared for it? So it's like a warning light on your car dashboard. It's a check for gas, check the mileage. You can ignore it and then something might happen. And so I would not necessarily avoid the anxiety. I would, again, talking about our podcast, Mindful Pass, is let's be mindful. What is this anxiety about? Is there something we can do about it? In which case, why worry, as Dalai Lama said? If there's nothing you can do about it, again, why worry? Evening, Nick. How you doing?
Hello, Harry. How are we doing? I'm excited by today's. Well, I shouldn't be excited. I'm laughing because I'm quite looking forward to today's conversation. We've just had a very brief, literally 2-minute chat offline to talk about what we're going to chat about today. And I got the sense, although Harry's going to defend himself here, that he's a little bit more stressed than usual. I'm not used to this stressed, Harry. And he tells me he's not stressed. He's tired. And I thought, you know what? Let's jump into it live on the show. Let's bring the audience into our conversation. Let's talk about stress. Let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about maybe some tips or maybe our best tips to helping with things like anxiety, to help people de-stress. It was Hans Sales that said that it's not stress that kills us, it's our reaction to it. So I thought, well, I've got someone in front of me right now who I'm feeling de-stressed today. I'm feeling good. And I've got Harry on, and his energy didn't quite match mine when we first chatted. He feels like he's, to me anyway, not the usual top of the world Hari Kalymnios that I'm used to. So Harry, take the floor. How you feeling, buddy?
Yeah. I honestly, I feel jet lagged. I feel tired, even though I've been back about a week. It's because I just got back again from somewhere else, and although it was a European destination, like just with timelines, flights, all of that, and so I've come back to the house and I'm trying to sort things out, but my brain isn't there, and so part of me is just like pushing on till 9 o'clock so I can go to sleep at a reasonable hour and reset my body. But actually, talking about stress, because one of the things actually that causes a lot of stress, which people maybe aren't appreciative of, is sleep disruption, right? Whether that's lack of sleep, different time zones, whatever else. Because when you don't sleep well, you don't get enough glucose to your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive function of your brain, the part of the brain that makes rational decision making, makes us human, conversations, and so on. And you go more into kind of primal part of your brain, which is the kind of stress, fight or flight area of the brain. So I honestly don't know how new parents do it, because they're constantly sleep deprived. And I understand when people are sleep deprived, they do become more stressed or more short or more anxious. And so that might be playing a part. And I guess also in my head, I'm like, I'm going to go back. I've got to do the washing up. I've got to do the washing. I like to be organized after a trip. And so I wake up the next day where everything's done rather than the suitcase is still to go. So
I guess interestingly, it's when we're sleeping that our brain reorganizes and cleanses itself, right? And if you're lacking sleep and you've got all that stuff in your mind, things you've got to do, it's harder to organize our thoughts. Hard enough sometimes to take that breath because we're tired. And interestingly, I was laughing when I was saying in that introduction, I didn't know where that introduction was going to go, but I was obviously highlighting you're a bit stressed. I know for me, the one thing that gets me stressed when I'm not stressed is when someone tells me that I'm stressed when I'm not. I'm like instantly, no, I'm not. And I'm like, now I'm sounding like I'm stressed. Like my wife will say to me, no, why are you so stressed? I'm like, I'm not stressed. Oh, yes, you are. No, I'm not. And suddenly I'm feeling stressed when I wasn't feeling stressed before. And I know that I've just done that to you, my good friend. So, I've encouraged a little bit of stress here by coming to you and saying, hey, you've been
honestly, also maybe like I tell you what it also might be. It's like it's a kind of culture shock, because I've been away pretty much most of the summer. Like I've come back here and there, but I've now come back and there's no more trips on the horizon. So I'm settling into this idea, and I think it's now the first day of autumn, officially the first day of autumn today. So I'm settling back into the UK when it's autumn. It's raining outside right now. It's dark or getting dark. And the reality of the next year, I don't know if it's about you, but I still think about years in terms of September to August instead of January to.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah, I mean, you've got kids, so it kind of works that way, and I work a lot in school, so it kind of works that way for me. And so now I'm like, okay, it's the new year, as it were, and the reality of not being on holiday and escapism and all that comes with being on holiday is now settling in, and I've actually, had a disruption to my October plan because of various things beyond my control, which means I'm having to reevaluate how I plan my October basically. And so I think there's an element of ambiguity and stress associated to that, as I make plans for that. So there's a few things, but I think it is useful to talk about the adaptiveness we have to stress, because at the end of the day, we never are going to live a life free of stress, right? The only people with no stress are the dead people, and even then, we don't know for sure if they're not stressed or not. So we're going to have to deal with stress, and as you said earlier, I can't remember the quote you were quoting, but it's not the stressor itself. It's always your response, I would say, to that stressor that's important, because we can both have the same.
It's not stress that kills us; it's our reaction to it. And you're right about stress.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've talked on the show before. Not everyone's familiar with the word de-stress. I'm distressed rather. I'm distress, not de-stress, distress. But not everyone's familiar with the term eustress. And stress actually operates on a bell curve. So we can actually perform really, really well under stress. That's the eustress curve. And we feel like we're thriving. We feel like we've got focus. We feel like, actually, this is, I'm under pressure, but I love this pressure. That's kind of the eustress. Is when we go over that bell curve due to lack of sleep being one of those things. Maybe we're anxious about something. Maybe we're not getting enough social connection to bring in your beat model into play. All these kind of things. Suddenly it's quite, because the eustress part of the bell curve is right at the top of the bell curve. It doesn't take much for us to move over into distress. And I guess it's that recognition that sometimes we can thrive, but it doesn't take an awful lot of that tipping point, just to tip us over, tip the balance. And chronic stress, of course, is a lot more problematic. But I think at the moment, you and I are negotiating quite a few things in our lives. From, you've been all over the world, you're jet lagged, you've got work. For me, I've got kids, and my son's gone away today on his first ever residential, but there's school pickups, you've got to negotiate work. Sometimes I'm thriving in that environment, and sometimes it just gets too much, and you think, shit, it's too much. And now the temper's coming out, and now my sleep's impacted. And now these things come through. And as you know, I've suffered insomnia for many years. It's very much under control at the moment, which is wonderful. I'm not, under any medication. I'm sleeping really well. But that insomnia kicked off initially because I had huge amounts of stress, a distress level of stress, where it was impacting my sleep. And then it became a psychological problem, all right? When the initial issues disappeared that were causing me the stress, they were taken over by the stress of, am I going to sleep tonight? And actually, it's crazy. But at some point, I suddenly realized I couldn't even remember what I was stressed about initially. But the stress of worrying about whether I was even going to sleep became a self-fulfilling prophecy that I wouldn't sleep because I was so stressed about sleep. It's crazy. And we start teaching ourselves these crazy stories that impact the way that we think, the way that we react, the way that we, all of our emotions, really. And we know that, as you mentioned, the frontal lobe, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, all these elements can impact our brain function. And it's difficult. So I thought, you and I aren't going to be alone in this, right? We know that a lot of people that listen to this probably are listening to it because they're struggling with certain things in their lives. They're struggling to find that happy place. So what are some of the things that people can do? You mentioned sleep straight away. I think it was the Dalai Lama that said that sleep is the best meditation. So maybe let's start there. Something you're quite well versed in. You like to meditate.
Ironically enough, and it's weird, last night I checked my Aura stats and I got only 6 minutes of deep sleep, which I was really surprised by. And I'm not sure if that's because it is really low. And also I took a melatonin to get over the jet lag. So I've taken I'm going to stop tonight. But last night I was in my friend's hotel room. His wife had to go back a day early, which actually was convenient for me because my accommodation ran out yesterday. So he had 2 beds in his room. So I was staying in there with him, but it wasn't like he wasn't snoring. It wasn't noisy. Maybe because I was on a single bed and every time you move, I kind of wake up a little bit to not fall off. But for some reason I only got 6 minutes and I was in bed for close to 8 hours and I woke up feeling tired and I knew something was up. But so for me, sleep is number one in terms of getting in to build up your emotional bank account so that you're ready for those withdrawals when it comes to stress. It's also quite good when you are stressed. However, usually when you're stressed, you can't sleep as much. So I would probably put that aside as a remedy. It's definitely something as a baseline that you want to have a decent amount of. In people watching the video can see I've got my blue light blockers on today because I'm trying to downregulate my system a little bit. But I think I mean, I'm not sure whether to go for the big stress strategy first or last, in what I deal personally when it comes to stress. Um, I'll go for it a bit later, I think. But
Okay.
in
Well, tell
terms
you
of,
what,
in terms of,
I've got a few things that I would recommend as well. So maybe I'll hold mine for a minute, and maybe later on in the show we'll work out if our things are. Oh, I just lost my there you go. If the things we've got are going to be the same, so I think that'd be quite interesting. But before we get there, just because you mentioned sleep, and I mentioned it, and I'm getting stressful now because my camera keeps turning in and off. If you can hear that,
mm,
um, is that we both use sleep as an example that when you're not sleeping, often because of a stress that's nothing to do with sleep, but it keeps us up at night because we can't, get rid of our thoughts, and they're racing around in our heads, and we can't switch off. And eventually, if you go for a couple of nights without sleep, you start stressing about the fact, I really need sleep today. I'm so tired. I need sleep. I have to get it. So we stress about it. For you, where's the connection then, or the differential point between stress and anxiety? Because I would say that I sometimes definitely suffer from stress, but it's very rare that I suffer from anxiety. And yet I think there's a pretty close and inherent link
I
between the
mean,
two. I can be anxious, I'm not going to sleep, or hopefully you can see the connection. What do you
yeah,
think?
I mean, for me, it, the way that I believe that you are using the term stress is because you're stressed about something that has happened. Okay, you have, I don't know, whatever, upset your wife, or your camera is not working, or something's happened, right? The differential part for me in that is that anxiety is stressing about something that has not happened yet. It's about something that is going to happen. So when you're anxious, it's usually, oh, okay, I'm going to this party, or I'm going to have to do a speech in front of people. It's stressing about the future. They say depression is stressing about the past, and anxiety is stressing about the future. Um, you're stressing about the past, but it's not depression, but it's stressing about something that's happened. So that's how I understand that you're defining it as. So what I would say is anxiety or being anxious is usually about things that have yet to happen,
I like
at
that.
least how I understand
I
it.
think that's a really good that makes sense to me, because when I'm stressed, or I'm dealing on that eustress curve again, I feel like I can really thrive. I very rarely thrive when I'm feeling anxious. When you're anxiety, it kind of gives you something, the anxiety, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't give you anything positive. It's just sort of kind of all negative, really. Whereas stress you can really thrive in that environment. I guess maybe anxiety might
I,
help you over prepare
it does.
based
Yeah,
on
I
that.
was going to say anxiety can be useful. It's like everything, right? Nothing is good nor bad. It's just I think it makes it so. So when you feel anxious, it's your body telling you something in advance. It's saying, let's say we're feeling anxious about a pitch, right? You're pitching for an investor for your company, and you're feeling anxious about it. Totally normal. But what is that anxiety telling you? Is it saying, let's go over those figures one more time? Is it saying, let's go for that walk in the park before we go in? Is it saying, this is really important to me, and so I'm going to make sure I do everything I can in order to be prepared for it? So it's like a warning light on your car dashboard. It's a check the gas, check the mileage. You can ignore it, and then something might happen. And so I would not necessarily avoid the anxiety. I would, again, talking about our podcast, Mindful Pass, is let's be mindful. What is this anxiety about? Is there something we can do about it? In which case, why worry? As the Dalai Lama said, if there's nothing you can do about it, again, why worry? So I would look at that anxiety and say, okay, what is it I'm specifically anxious about? Is there something I can do about it? If there is, let me deal with it. If there isn't, okay, let me acknowledge that anxiety and let me do something that will help alleviate that anxiety. That's where the remedies that we're going to talk about are going to come in, because that's where you can't do anything about the thing itself. So we're going to about the thing you're anxious about, but you're going to do something about the anxiety, the thing that ultimately happens, right? Your high blood pressure, your heart rate, your sweating, your ability to forget your words, all of that we can deal with some of the practices we may talk about in a moment. If you can't deal with the thing itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty good. I think you mentioned the word worry, and worry really is and I think earlier you said as well, talking about the fight, flight, and freeze response, which is the reptilian brain response, if you like, the innate response that we have. And worry, of course, is I guess our original way of problem solving. you're worried about that thing that's going to eat us. So we've got to problem solve as a result of, so it's okay. So people don't always look at worry in that way, but ultimately that's what it encourages us to do. It encourages us to prepare. It's when it becomes unproductive, I guess we've got to be more mindful in relation to what we're trying to do on the show. And when we are mindful of these things, we bring awareness to what is causing us anxiety or what's causing us worry or what's causing us stress, that we've got a few things that we can do about it. What was really interesting, I don't know if people listening to this today have listened to the last episode, but we talked about being, spontaneity and changing our routes to work. And you said, it's not about doing these massive spontaneous things. It's about making little adjustments. And I think it kind of highlights the same in this instance. Like our brain is plastic, right? It can be moldable. And if we're able to do little things all the time, we can reduce our stress, our anxiety, and our worry. We can rewire our brain, but you can't do it instantly. You've got to do it over little changes, little improvements that might start with a little bit more sleep, going to bed half an hour earlier, getting up half an hour later. It might be, switching off your computer a few minutes earlier, and slowly over time we can start to rewire our brains to be a little bit more resilient to it, or also obviously to reduce some of the things that are coming. And that's what I've had to try and do when I'm working with my coaches.
Actually, speaking of rewiring the brain, I want a couple of things on that. Is often when I'm explaining how the neural pathways work in the brain, where your habits become like a little bit more strongly formed, is to equate it to you're a runner, so when you run on the grass and lots of people run on the same patch of grass, it kind of wears through, and you become an obvious path. But if just one runner ran on that grass just once, you're not going to see that path. And so that repetition in a certain practice, whether that's meditation, whether that's whatever, and it can be with worry as well, you create a neural pathway, and this thing called myelin sheath gets stronger and stronger. It's it's a protective layer around that neural pathway. But what I wanted to say, actually, linking the neural pathways to sleep, which I don't think you necessarily do in your space, but I've been saying this for ages. And I was listening to the Diary of a CEO podcast, and he was talking to someone recently, and I forget who he was talking to, but he was talking about hearing sleep experts on his podcast, and he was talking about Matthew Walker, and he was saying how the thing that he really took away from that conversation, and I was really surprised because I'm like, this is obvious to me, and it's one of the things I talk about all the time when it comes to sleep hygiene, is just to make your he was talking with Brian Johnson, that's it, Brian Johnson, the guy who's trying to live forever and spending £2 million a year on his biohacking. But he was saying, make your bedroom as unexciting as possible, or as dull as possible, because your bedroom, and I agree with him, your bedroom should be just purely for sleep, right? Sleep and or sex. But really, let's say its priority is sleep. And so you shouldn't have anything in that bedroom. Like for years, I didn't even have a wardrobe in my bedroom. I literally just had a bed and a bedside table. And then I had to put a wardrobe in because of changes to the domestic situation. But right now I have basically, that's it, a bed and a wardrobe in my room. Definitely no TV. I never bring my laptop in there. I don't bring food in there. I wouldn't bring an argument in there. I wouldn't bring anything in there, because you want that bed and that room to create a neural association with your mind of it's just for sleep, which is again why when you're an insomniac, if you're struggling to fall asleep and you've been in bed for more than 15 minutes, I would normally suggest get out of that room. Otherwise you start to associate the bed with staying awake. And so for me, it's make that bedroom as uninviting as possible. And I know people have TVs in the room, and actually couples that have TVs in their room tend to have about, I think it's 30 or 40% less sex than couples that don't have TVs in their room. So that's another excuse to get the TV out of your room for those people listening that want more sex with their partner. But don't bring your phones in, right? Like, don't get on your phone in bed. All of these things are obvious to me, but yet people don't do them. And this is going to impact your ability to sleep, I guarantee it.
Challenge something in that. So I'm not challenging the TV, certainly not challenging the phone. And I couldn't really, not sure whether having a wardrobe or not having a wardrobe would make a blind bit of difference to me in my bedroom.
No, that probably doesn't, but still.
I think the bit I'd challenge is, like, someone who has suffered from insomnia for a long time, you want to make your bedroom the place you want to be to sleep. So, okay, don't invest in your TV, but you don't want it basic. If you went to see our bedroom, like, we've got 3 different throws on our bedroom of like the most luxurious, soft, fabric throws and skip with like rugs and like you want to be in there. You want to feel like when you're in there in your own little sleep heaven. So you should be investing. It shouldn't be the way that you described it made it sound very basic. You should invest in things.
Unexciting. No, but I said unexciting. So
Yeah, but that's
unstimulated.
not
I guess the
unexciting.
right
You want
word
to
is
be excited about
unstimulating.
going to bed. You want to be excited about the place you go to rest your head. That when you
But
get there, you feel warm, relaxed, and you can go. Rather than you described it like a prison. To me, it came across like a prison cell. Right? I don't want to sleep in that room. I don't want to go there. I'd rather sleep on the sofa downstairs.
Let me tell you a quick little story. Actually, so when I was in Colombia not that long ago, I went to this island, beautiful island called San Andreas, which is off the coast of Nicaragua, Caribbean island. And I stayed in a hostel, but I didn't want to stay in the dorm in the hostel, so I stayed in a private room. Now, the private room they got me, initially when I walked in there, I was like, oh my God, because I went in and there was like no windows, right? No natural light. It was in the middle, because I said I just want a quiet room because I haven't slept for like ages. I just want a quiet room away from the bar because I knew it'd be quite busy. But I also then twigged within about 30 seconds of being there, I go, this is going to be brilliant, because I was getting up. I get up with the smallest amount of light. So I was like, this is going to be like being in a bit of a coffin, really. And I slept so well in that room. It had air conditioning, luckily. So I got the temperature down to about 18 degrees. I had complete darkness and I slept brilliantly for the few nights that I was there. I'm not saying don't make your bed enticing, right? You want the best mattress, the best pillows, the thing that's going to make you excited to be in bed, but in bed to sleep.
I'm glad you said that. I was literally waiting for you to tell me some statistics on how people in prison with no windows, no doors, sleep better than anyone else in the world. And you've got this stat, and I was gonna challenge it. But yeah, you got to make your bed enticing, dude. And also, if you want that sex metric to work, your partner wants to be in a bed that's relatively comfortable and exciting to be in as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But you don't want that partner then to be distracted with a dirty dish in the corner and then the laptop blinking light going on, or
and
any
cornflakes
of
in the bed. No, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, there might be an opportunity to have certain food stuff in the bed, but that's up to you and your partner. I'm not going to delve into that, what you do in the bedroom. But what I'm saying is, for generally speaking, you want the bedroom to be set up as a place just for sleep and sex. Okay,
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
basically it.
I would challenge anyone listening to this who could say that having their phone next to them, is not a distraction to their sleep in some way, shape, or form. And I have mine next to me, which is terrible. I use my alarm on my phone. We've had this conversation about our routines in the morning.
Hey, where's your phone right now, by the way? Let me ask you a quick question. Let's do an experiment for the rest of this call.
Well, for me, it's not really. I haven't left this desk since I started work at.
But where is your phone right now? Where is your phone?
Right in front of me. Here.
Okay. I have a challenge for you. Can you just put it behind your screen? Just put it behind your
I've got
screen.
nowhere to put it. I've got like a gap behind my
or
screen.
on the floor, somewhere that you can't see it. Just somewhere you can't see it.
You can witness me throw it. There we go.
As long as you can't see it.
I can't see it. It's on a chair that's behind my laptop.
Because I tell you what, this sounds so silly, and I've mentioned this on this podcast before. And just before this call, I got my phone, which was to the left of me, and I put it behind my screen. And the simple act, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's as simple as I can put it. And then it does change things for me.
I would agree with you, right? However, I'm going to say this, and anyone that's tried to contact me in the last probably 3-4 months will know this, including my wife. You can't contact me. I literally don't look at it now. I'm able to have it here without looking at it. So I'll have WhatsApp messages, iMessages, things. I'm in so many WhatsApp groups. Honestly, they're stressful just seeing how many I'm in. But I just cannot look at it in the day, or I end up getting no work done because it's such a distraction. That when you've got enough distraction in Outlook and other tools in front of me without having my phone as being one as well. So now my wife is like, well, Nick, how do I actually contact you? Because she used to be, I won't WhatsApp because you don't look at that anymore. I look at, and I can't look at any of it. You literally have to call me on the work phone. And then she goes through to the reception, has to come redirected to my house to come here. It's like, I don't know. If I look at it, I lose an hour of time.
Well, this is why I didn't text you. I was going to text you around 1:30 today on the train on the way back from the airport saying we're still good for tonight. And I thought there's no point because I know you're not going to look at it. And so I texted you around 5:30.
You have experienced it. I haven't been looking at it.
About 5:30. But it's about training the people. But I know certain friends of mine don't check their WhatsApp. So if I send them something on WhatsApp that I want them to look at, I actually send them a normal text because they do look at the normal text. So you train your friends and you kind of figure out what works as a communication way for them. But speaking about going back to stress, right? We talked about sleep, which is as a buffer preceding stress or anxiety. But some of the techniques that you would go to or I would go to when it comes to anxiety and stress. Now, for me, a big one. I might have mentioned it on the show before. I'm not sure if I did or not. I've definitely mentioned it to some people. Maybe it was students of mine. But breath work is a big one for me for stress, because when you get stressed, you tend to breathe into the upper chest. You tend to activate more of your sympathetic nervous system and so on. The most stressful point in my life, probably over certainly the last year, as you know, would have been Christmas Eve last year.
Sure.
And so when I found out that my dad had like passed away, I was in my sister's house in Brighton, and I knew that I was going to have to take a 90 to 2 hour drive back to London to be with my mum, pick up my mum. And I kid you not, I was just doing some severely strong breath work in the living room of my sister's house before going in, because I knew that I was in the reptilian part of my brain, and I'm not in a good position to be able to drive when I'm in that state. Luckily, I have enough cognitive ability in that moment to focus on the breath, and I was taking some, a mixture of various Wim Hof breathing, relaxation breaths, deep breaths, a bunch of different things, just to be able to cope, just to be able to articulate a sentence, just to be able to drive safely. So I guarantee, like, breath work, depending on the breath work you're doing, will work for a lot of people when it comes to stress, anxiety.
There's a reason people say take a deep breath when you're going into a stressful situation, right? There's a reason for that. I think we've talked about it before, because when I first discovered this, which would have been actually the oxygen advantage, which I know you've read before I did.
Yeah, Patrick McGowan. Yeah,
I'd never considered this. This was a couple of years ago now, for those listening, and maybe we've shared this before, and if you're a regular listener, you already know what I'm going to say. But when I first read that, the section he has on take a deep breath, right? It's there for a reason, because breath work is so important in terms of helping us control our thoughts. The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to control one thought over another. So, there's things we can do. But when he said take a deep breath, the first thing I did is go as if I'm going underwater, right? And I breathed in through my mouth. I took a really big breath. And he says in the book, and I thought it was really interesting, and try this at home. If this is new to you, try it. First thing we do, most of us take a deep breath, is we take a big breath. That's not what I'm asking you to do, which means we go, and then we try and hold on to it, and we feel like we've taken a really big breath, often through our mouth. But actually, and he explains, what is depth? Depth is taking something, if you think about depth in the sea, it's going from deep down. And the only way you can really take a deep breath is actually by breathing in through your nose. So if you're listening to this now and you try this, take a really, I say you don't have to take a big breath, but take a deep breath, but in through the nose. And notice where the oxygen goes in your body. Because if you take a deep breath from the mouth, it only really fills up the top part of your chest. If you take it in from your nose, you'll actually feel the air fill up right from the depth of your stomach. Now, that's a little bit of a small thing, but when it hit me, this was like, oh my God, I have never noticed that. I'm 40 years old, 41 years old when I discovered this. And I was like, wow, and you look at the people that do the deep sea diving, all the bits and pieces, hold their breath. They take it in from the nose. They don't always take big breaths. They take deep breaths. It's not about how much you can try and get in. It's taking the breath from the bottom, filling up the lungs from the bottom upwards. And for me, that was like mind blowing. And it made a huge difference to my ability to be able to get into those meditative states and to be able to properly relax. When I was trying to do it with big breaths. I've been listening to, I don't know, whatever the app was on my phone at the time or whatever, trying to get into this relaxed state. And I was going, and it was like, oh, I'm failing before I even start here, because I'm not getting it right.
But when you breathe into that belly, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your vagus nerve, all of these things that actually help stimulate that relaxation response. And we could do more on breath. And actually, part of the reason that Patrick McGowan, the interesting thing I found with Patrick McGowan's work was about carbon dioxide, because it's all about carbon dioxide really is allowing oxygen into the cells, which is where it's needed. You don't need to oxygenate your blood so much as you need to oxygenate your cells. And by having carbon dioxide, it's the gatekeeper to opening the doors to the cells. And that's why I don't know if I've explained to you, but I was talking to one of my friends and convincing him to do his spin classes just with nasal breathing.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So, and when you do that, it's amazing, because you end up being able to have a conversation when you get off the bike, whereas you wouldn't have been able to before, because you're actually you feel like you're breathing less oxygen in, but which you are in a way, but you're actually getting more into the cells, which is where it's needed, and therefore the muscles are working a lot
And
harder.
it's the modern way that we live that most people, or a lot of people, have become mouth breathers. But we were designed to be nasal breathers for many reasons. And actually, a lot of the people that are struggling with their sleep, to take it back to the sleep element, because they've got a partner that snores. One of the most common reasons people can't sleep is because of a partner and the way that they're restless. But actually, I'm sure I read the stat of being around 90% of people that snore can be solved if you move them from mouth breathing to nasal breathing.
Yeah.
And there are things you can do. You can buy tape to tape.
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, you
Loads
say
of
that
things
because
to do.
last night my friend and I were talking before we went to bed, because he did say that he's a bit of a snorer, and so I put some tape on my mouth because I had some tape with me, and I was left some for him to do, but he didn't do it in the end because he was on the phone to his wife, and he did actually snore a little bit during the night. And rather than wake him up and get him to tape up his mouth, I just put earplugs in. But he was willing to give it a go. And one of my other good friends from Austin, his wife read the book Breathe by James Nestor and convinced her husband to put tape on him, and he's now stopped snoring. So definitely works for. I think I haven't heard of anyone who personally.
I haven't. I think it can
Work.
take up to 4 weeks for your body to naturally adjust, I think, which sometimes puts people off.
And you'll wake up with more energy. You'll wake up less dehydrated. You'll wake up less stressed. I certainly find that whenever I sleep with mouth tape, which hasn't been that often recently, but I wake up feeling more energized. So I'll probably do that tonight, actually.
I was excited to discover when I tried it that I'm a natural nasal breather at night, which is really good for me. Which maybe that's why I can function on less sleep than others. I don't know, but I always have been. But for people listening who aren't familiar, like there's sometimes a fear when we talk about mouth taping, because they think you're literally putting gaffer tape. It's nothing like that. We're talking a little bit of 3M tape, just enough to remind
as wide as a pen, if those watching, like just that wide, because actually you can still breathe through the side of the mouth. You can still open your mouth. It's more to trick the brain and to tell the brain just to keep the mouth closed. It relaxes the jaw a little bit, I find, as well. So breathing would be a big one that I would recommend for those suffering from stress, anxiety. And again, it's not necessarily that the breathing is going to solve the root of the stress, but what it's going to do is it's going to activate that part of the brain that allows you to think about problem solving and dealing with that, because you can't do anything when you're in that primal part of your brain, really.
I'm really glad you used that word. And I'll tell you for why, because you talked about taking deep breaths when you were going, on that drive back to see your mum. And I totally understand why it helped you collect. Often we take deep breaths to collect our thoughts, right? And that's kind of a cliche, but as you always say, if there's a cliche out there, we need to listen to it. You used the word think just then. So for me, I don't usually tell myself to take deep breaths, but I usually naturally do them when I tell what I do as a stress reliever, which is, for me, I know that I'm a big believer in Sydney Banks's way of looking at the world, of linking the thought consciousness, mind consciousness and thought together, and how they all link. And if you can change your thoughts, you can change the way that you feel. So for me, when I'm in a stressful situation, and for those listening will know that I also sadly lost my dad this year at his bedside to prostate cancer. It's a stressful place to be. You're anxious about when that time is going to come. But one of the things that causes me anxiety and or stress is my thought processes. You start imagining what may or may not happen. You create a future which hasn't happened yet, but it stresses us out because our thoughts can run away with us. And we know that, our natural tendency will be survival. And when we're trying to survive, we think of the things we need to do to make sure we're in a safe space and we can survive what's about to come. So for me, one of my stress or anxiety related things I'll do to try and control that is I'll try and bring myself into a place of awareness to know what am I thinking about, and can I change that thought pattern. If I can change that thought pattern, I know I can change the way I'm feeling about it. Sometimes easier said than done, but interestingly, in order for me to do that, I naturally take deeper breaths. I slow down to speed up. I try and collect my thoughts and try and say, where are these coming from? Bring myself to a place of awareness. But for me, my natural thing will be, okay, this is not serving me right now. This anxiety isn't serving me. These thoughts aren't serving me. They're putting me into a place that I'm not comfortable with. I need to change my thought process. I need to find a different way of thinking about what it is that's impacting me, and hope that on the other side of that, it'll change the way I feel about it. Whether that's bringing in gratitude, often that's something I'll try and take my brain towards, or thankfulness for where I am. So using my dad as an example, of course, I was incredibly stressed and anxious about what I knew was the inevitable was going to come, but instead collecting my thoughts enabled me in that moment to try and be thankful for the time that I now have to be by his side, a time that maybe I would be comparing and say, I know Harry didn't have, and it just changes the way you feel about a moment. But what's
Hmm.
interesting is every time you do that, or I do it, I naturally take deep breaths. But that process comes before the breathing for me, but one naturally tends to happen over the other. And I imagine in your instance, when you're focusing on your breathing, the opposite, the same happens for you. You start collecting your thoughts, and you can control that process a little bit
It
easier as well.
activates my brain, and like, because all I really need to think about in that moment is the breath, and then the rest of it comes. And again, like before I take a, let's say, a challenging phone call, and this moves me on to my next part when it comes to stress relieving strategies, is I will tend to take. So I had a call the other day that was potentially going to be a stressful call. It was around work. It was around the cancellation of a lot of work, and that's part of the stress that I've got at the moment, which ironically has happened because I wasn't able to make a particular obligatory training day, which was actually talking about anxiety and how to deal with anxiety in people. And
Couldn't
I'm
make
like,
this stuff up, right?
and,
The
and I'm like,
irony.
I've been teaching this stuff for the last 15 years. So
Just
doing
to
a
recap,
3 hour.
you were stressed and anxious about the fact you couldn't make a training session about stress
No,
and
no,
anxiety.
I wasn't stressed about anxious about the training session. I was beginning to be anxious about the phone call I was about to make,
Okay, about
which
the video,
was
couldn't
in
make it.
regard
Yeah.
to
Right.
understanding the release of work that unfortunately was going to happen and has happened.
Could have a little
Um,
smile about them, haven't you? I mean, the
yeah,
idea,
but again, I'm thinking I teach this stuff anyway to people. So the additional training that I was going to receive, yes, I'm always willing to learn more ideas, but it's not going to necessarily affect my ability to train. However, before making that phone call, and as I recommend to other people, if they've got an interview, a telephone interview, anything like that, I made sure I did my breathing. I then also made sure I was standing up and I was moving. And the reason I'm putting moving there, or exercise, as a stress reliever is when we get stressed, we tend to build up that, well, it's not really a stress hormone, but cortisol, which is often associated with stress, we build up cortisol. Now, there's two main ways of getting rid of that cortisol in that stressful moment. One is deep diaphragmatic breathing, which we've talked about in terms of taking that deep breath into the diaphragm or the belly. The other way is to disperse it using exercise or movement. And so as I was making that phone call, I was in a much better state because I was able to pace up and down. And I was literally only pacing like maybe 10 steps one way or 5 steps one way, 5 steps the other way, doing my deep breathing both before and also um, during the call, but not obviously with audible sound. But I was being conscious of nasal breathing, belly breathing as the other person was speaking, so that I could not react to the thing that they were saying, but to be able to respond in the way that I wanted to. So for me, moving the body is super critical, which is why before I do a presentation, I'll be maybe on the rebounder, moving. Often, even when I'm delivering here, I'm not doing it today, but often I'll be standing up because I know I'm going to have a different energy about me. So I would say moving the body. So you've got to think, it's like, how can I get rid of that cortisol? Because the cortisol that's creating that stress. And when I can't sleep at night, often it's because I haven't moved enough during the day. And if I haven't moved enough, then the brain gets busy because it wants to use up energy and use up the energy that it could have used during the day. So I would say movement or exercise is a great stress reliever for many people. It can also create stress, and it does create stress, but I would say movement is super important, more so than hardcore exercise.
Yeah, well, it's probably been number one on my list, physical activity, right? And obviously, it's something that I do every day, and I certainly feel stressed if I don't do it. Part of that will be breaking
Mm.
routine as well. My body's got used to it, which makes a difference. But I was just thinking, I don't know if this is true. You might know, but I was thinking about, we take naturally. I said, take a deep breath when we're going into a stressful situation. A visual appeared in my head of, if you think about a stressful situation in a movie or something, often you'll see people pacing up and down when they're stressed or they're anxious. They're taking deep
Mm.
breaths and they're pacing. That's that movement that you were saying, make sure I'm moving. Or if we think about, the huge rise in attention deficit disorder, ADHD at the moment, but actually often this comes to the fore because people are put into stressful situations. They don't know how to react. They need to concentrate, whatever. But it usually manifests itself through movement. Now, maybe that's sometimes disruptive movement in occasion because they don't know how to manage it effectively. But it often comes out in the way of movement through, just whatever that is,
Well, I'll
fidgeting.
tell you. I'll tell you why in a second if you want. Yeah, I
But
mean, that,
I would say that physical activity, before we get there, is one of the best things you can do for your brain, right? It stimulates growth, it stimulates brain cell regeneration.
yeah,
You talked about
neurogenesis.
it,
Yeah.
it's there's so much science behind this. It's kind of hard to ignore it. And yet a lot of people, even now, don't get enough physical exercise in their daily routine, don't take enough
Well,
breaks,
yeah.
get that exercise in. But yeah, for me,
I mean,
it's
even
number one.
even the last couple of days, actually, I was at a wedding. I said in Corfu for my friend's brother's wedding, and I wasn't moving as much because I wasn't doing my morning routine in the same way, so I didn't have my rebounder and so on. And then I was getting up, getting in the car with my friend to go to the place, and I was looking. I'm like, I'm only at like 6, 7, 8,000 steps. I have to move because I know when I come to the end of the day, I start to feel angsty even during the day if I know that I'm not moving, not because I'm looking at my watch. I feel angsty in some way. And then I looked and I was like, oh, that's why I'm feeling angsty, because I physically haven't moved enough. And so I deliberately went to a supermarket, which was a 20-minute walk one way and then a 20-minute walk back with the bags, holding the bags. And I felt great that after that. I
Yeah.
rocked up maybe like 12, 15,000 steps. I felt really good. But going back to the thing about, watching a movie and seeing the person nervous and pacing up and down, what I tell my delegates a lot of the time is when you are stressed, let's say you're doing that speech and you start to get that like nervous twitch in your leg, is because when you get into a stressful state, your body shuts pretty much everything down except for your heart, lungs, arms, and legs, because it needs those things in order to be able to pump blood around the body and run away or fight, literally fight or flight. And so I actually say it will shut down, your ability to speak, your ability to think, but also things like your immune system will close down, which is why when you're stressed consistently, you're going to have a depleted immune system and you're going to be more susceptible to getting ill from a common cold or anything more serious, because the body is thinking, what's the more immediate threat, this lion in front of me or this virus that is floating around the community? Well, obviously the lion, because if you don't survive the next 5 minutes, it doesn't matter what the virus will do to you in 2 weeks' time. And so it shuts down everything except for your arms, effectively your arms, legs, heart, and lungs, because that's what it needs in order to survive. And so that's why you see people pacing up and down. But the challenge is they're doing that whilst in the fight or flight. So they're having this conversation and maybe they're not making any sense, or maybe they're reacting instead of responding. And so if they would just do that pacing before the call and do the breathing before the call, so they've already depleted that stress level, they'll be able to have that call in a completely different fashion.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the lion example there, which is obviously people can relate to because that's that goes back a long, long way. But actually, we've been living in a place of scarcity for most of human history. It's only the last probably generation or two that we've started to live in a world of abundance. Our grandparents would have, were rationed and had to fight for survival in terms of the way that they worked, it's the way they had. It's. I think we're still kind of adjusting to it because for thousands of years, since the dawn of human history, certainly, we've always had to have that reptilian response, if you like, that ability to either fight, flight, or freeze to survive. And it's only now in the modern world where there seems to be, abundance everywhere in terms of food and access to media and access to revenue and what we want to do and entrepreneurial and all these kind of things that are around us, that we think that we forget that that's so inherently wired within us, because we're not yet. We've been doing that for years. It takes a long time to unwire anything. We talked about wiring earlier, but also what I want to link it to when you talk about, because with the lion, is you can't really talk about physical exercise without also talking about diet. And I think diet is also something else that has a massive contributing factor to how, whether we feel stressed or whether we feel anxious. And for some people that might feel strange, or how on earth can what I eat impact whether I feel anxious? But for me, it's really, really important, not just the reason we're eating, but also the quality of the foods that we're getting, the benefits of fatty acids and the things, omega-3s and things like that can make a difference. Whether you're drinking too much, how that impacts our sleep, the food, how that impacts our sleep. They all kind of are interconnected things that impact our anxiety levels and impact our stress levels. I know it's something you're hugely passionate about in terms of nutrition and vitality within the body. But for me, if you try and exercise really hard, but you aren't getting nutritionally right, as you said, exercise can be stressful on the body as well. They all need to work in harmony.
Yeah. I mean, I can almost guarantee for people maybe listening, or their children or something, if they have, let's say, unspecified anxiety, like say non-specific anxiety, so not about like, okay, there's a specific bully at school bullying them, right, and they're anxious about that. But let's say a lot of people are suffering from this kind of weird, hard to put your finger on it anxiety, right? I guarantee, I would almost guarantee that if that whoever's suffering from this unspecified anxiety, where they don't quite know why they're anxious, but they're anxious, if they cleaned up their diet, so they got rid of all that processed food, ultra processed food, and they just stuck to whole, real foods, whether it's meat, whether it's vegetables, whatever, they cleaned up their sleep, so they were getting 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep a night for the next month, and they moved their body a lot. Even those three things, forgetting the breathwork element of things, I'd almost guarantee that that level of anxiety would change in a positive direction. It might not be totally gone, but I guarantee it'd be much better, provided they're not on like loads of medications as well, because I think that might impact things quite significantly. So I think food, sleep, movement, if you optimize those three things in society, we would see level, and you got rid of all the chemicals that were in our environment, of course, but like even those three things, because you and I are exposed to the same level of chemicals as a lot of other people. But if you optimize those three things, you would see rates of anxiety plummet, and you took away obviously social media inputs like first thing in the morning and last thing at night, and a few things like that, which comes into your sleep anyway. I almost guarantee that it would improve someone's
I
sleep,
think
because I know what I'm like when I eat badly and I sleep badly and I don't move my body. And I'm thinking, hang on a second, if people are like this year round for years on end, no wonder they feel stressed. No wonder they feel anxious. No wonder
I
they feel
agree.
panicked. You know,
If there's
it's
a
not rocket
fourth point,
science.
and I am going to make an assumption that this isn't on your list, but one of mine would be that, and I'm going to link it because I think if you're getting good sleep, you've got a really good healthy diet full of whole foods, as you mentioned, reducing the amount of crappy food that people do eat, but and you're getting good exercise. For me, all of those things, and maybe this is coming from my coaching background and what we tried to do, but they help you raise awareness of who you are in the moment and what you are faced with. It allows us to face, to reduce anxiety and de-stress, because our sense of awareness is hugely heightened. If we're eating a really bad diet, you tend to find your mind is consumed by things that aren't healthy to us. You don't want to open and expand your horizons or go for that brisk walk because you're feeling like you're full and you're lethargic and you just want to veg in front of the sofa and watch crappy television or whatever it is. If you're not getting enough sleep, the same thing is true. If you're not getting enough exercise, it changes the way that I don't think you can have the same level of awareness if one of those three things is out of sync. When those three things are together, though, you can actually operate in a state of such awareness. I use that very deliberately, that term, because I think when you're aware, it allows you to control your thoughts much better. It allows you to get in control of the things that are making you anxious. And we both know that sometimes like time can solve everything, right? If you wait long enough, the answer will come. It's that thinking of this too shall pass, which is something you talk about. But when you're in that moment and those three things are optimized, you're kind of aware that that's the case. It's when you haven't got those things optimized, the awareness, I
Yeah.
think, drops so low levels.
Mm-hmm.
You've got such a narrow view of the world that everything just seems to pile up. So I would think about, where is your level of awareness at the
Well,
moment
there's a
if you
reason
are
for
feeling
that.
anxious or stressed? I'm
There's,
sure there is. I mean, we talked about the Michael Neal piece where he talks about what level of the elevator you're on at the minute. How are you viewing the world? Are you on the top level where
well,
you
well,
can see everything, or are
well,
you
the
at the
thing is,
bottom level?
your awareness is
Figure it
coming
out.
from that executive function of your brain. It's coming from that prefrontal cortex part of the brain. This is what makes us very unique as mammals on this planet. Awareness is coming from that part of the brain. When you're not sleeping well and you're not eating well, you're not fueling that part of the brain properly, and therefore you're not going to have that awareness. So you can't, because you go into that fight or flight, and the fight or flight is just reactive. It's not an aware position of the brain.
I agree totally, but I don't know if people listening would necessarily think of awareness as being an important component or something we need to be mindful of in order to help them de-stress and reduce their anxiety. For me, when that's brought into the fore, we go, actually, I have optimized those two things. What is it I'm lacking? Let me just, if you're more aware that awareness is important, I think it can really help glue those other three things together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are
Yeah,
other
yeah.
techniques as well. In your beat model, we know that some of the things we need to make sure we've got our social connection, that we've got laughter and play, that we've got different things that can
Nature is the other
nature.
thing I would say is a
We've all got it.
really good de-stressor. So forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, as they call it in Japan, is an idea of just getting into nature. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a forest, but anything around nature can be even this morning, I managed to fit in a quick 5 minute swim. We were in a bit of a rush. My mate didn't want to do that, and I went to the beach. The water was so clear, so still. Went in for 5 minutes, and despite my 6 minutes of deep sleep, I needed that grounding. I needed that, and that's the other stress reliever is getting your feet on the ground, getting your body in natural water helps so much. So nature was one of the other things on my list. So I've said sleep, food, exercise, breath work, nature. Got a couple other ones, but what other ones are you thinking of? You've
Well,
also
I wanted to ask you a
preempted one.
question based on the nature of the show. We've titled it Mindful Pass. We're talking about mindfulness techniques a lot in the show that we have. Where would mindfulness techniques and meditation, if we put those two things loosely together,
Yeah,
have two separate, where would you place that on a
I,
1 to 5 of de-stress, reducing anxiety kind of?
I put that in a preemptive bucket. So a bit like the sleep. And the meditation falls into a similar bucket in that in the moment, for example, what I would say would be like, exercise, breath work, and a couple of other things I'll talk about. But to not allow yourself to get into that level of stressful state in the first place, because remember, all stress is really coming from your perception of the reality that's in front of you, not the actual reality itself. And so in order for you to be aware of the realness of that reality and not just whatever you want to create as in your head, meditation is the preemptive bit for that. Because I know, for example, if I have a bad meditation run, let's say I haven't meditated properly for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, I know that I'm more. I think I mentioned this to either you or someone recently, because my mum's moved in with me with all these changes, and I noticed myself getting quite short with her because obviously things are changing in my environment. And I became aware, and I was thinking, I haven't felt like this for about 10 years, right? And I'm starting to get edgy. Now, part of that is obviously I'm now back living with my mum after 15, 20 years of not doing that. But I was also thinking, I don't think it's just that. And I recognized that I wasn't doing the morning routines that I normally set up in terms of the meditation, in terms of the exercise, in terms of that. And that's when I had a word with my mum, and I'm like, I can't have any conversations with you in the day until I've done this stuff, because I'm not going to be productive in those
I think
conversations. And so I would say that would be there.
I would agree on meditation maybe as a preemptor. I think mindfulness techniques, though, can be really good in the present, particularly when you're struggling with something, to help ground you in the moment, to be more perceptive and
Yeah.
aware of what's happening in the moment, for sure. I think that's where it can be really, really useful. Again, you'll laugh because this literally happened this week. I try and have it's not long. Usually it's 7 minutes of kind of meditative zone out a day, right? I didn't do it. I didn't have a conversation with someone else but myself. I told myself as I walked past. I usually sit in a chair. It's in my room. It's in here. 2 chairs forward on. Really nice little space. I've created it so it's a really relaxing space. Can't see my computer screen, which is great because I see the back of it. So I'm kind of completely zoned out, and I can see I'm facing a window, so I've got a bit of nature. I'm just in my own little environment. I really enjoy it. And it's 7 minutes a day, right? You can always afford that. But when I was going to get some lunch, this was about two days ago. I went to get some lunch, and I told myself, can't do it today. I don't have time. Too stressed to do it. And I caught myself as I was doing it. I go, what am I saying? Like, this is the reason I should do it. I'm telling myself I don't have the time because I'm too stressed. And yet the one thing that's staring me for 7 minutes is going to potentially solve both of those problems. And yet I did catch myself. I almost dismissed it. And it was just, I was laughing at my own, and actually changed my whole disposition. I went from a stress state to laughing at myself for giving myself the reason I wasn't going to do it, which is the reason I do it. And you can see where I'm going. I end up taking that 7 minutes, and it really, really helped out. But I nearly dismissed it because I was too stressed and too busy. And yeah, that's the whole reason I do it in the first place.
It reminds me of that joke, the stressed up guy, the stressed up business guy goes to the monk or the Buddha. I'm really stressed. What do you recommend? And he says, right, using your language, like 7 minutes of meditation or mindfulness a day. And the guy goes, I haven't got time for 7 minutes a day. And he goes, in that case, I recommend an hour.
An hour, yeah.
So, but no, going back to what you're saying, yeah, mindfulness practices. Sometimes when I'm stressed, I do a mindful practice. So a couple of different ones I might do is I might look at some kind of not super intricate pattern, but a pattern that I can see somewhere or something. And I would try and really study that, especially if I've got a headache, because I sometimes when I get stressed, I get a headache, and I know then that's coming on, and it's a stress headache. I'll look at, so right now I'm looking at a net curtain, and there's like a little pattern of a flower or something. So I would intently look at that. The other thing I might do when I'm stressed and I feel that headache on is I will in my head internalize and vocalize the things I'm doing. So for example, I'll say, putting my hand on my bottle, bringing the bottle towards my mouth, taking a gulp of water, placing it back down. Because the reason I do that is because when I swamp my brain with the dialogue, the script, if you like, of what I'm doing in my life, it can't help but usually push out the other thing that's occupying my mind, because they can't really occupy two things can't occupy the same space at once. And so that's why I do that. So I would either have an internal dialogue, which would be a mindful conversation with myself about what I'm doing. I'm walking, I'm stepping on this rock and whatever, or I'll look at something a little bit intently. And not always it works, but a lot of the time it
No,
works.
it's good. I mean, like, I have two things that I do. There's five senses. I don't necessarily embrace them all, but when I tend to try and get outside, so I try and go ground myself, and I'll say to myself, I don't give myself a huge amount of time thing. So I'll say, right, I'm going to take 30 seconds to take a deep breath into the nose and see what I can smell. So you'll be out in nature. I usually would take Coco, the dog, for a walk or whatever, and I'll go out and I'll think, okay, I need to take a 30-second deep breath and just try and notice what it is I can smell at the minute. Whatever my stressful thing, it's not usually not scent orientated. It's about work. It's about whatever. So to bring that sense into play is usually the smell of cut grass or flowers or whatever. It just changes your mindset. And the second thing is I'll challenge myself to see something I don't usually see. So when we're out walking the dog, we're looking at our phones, or we're seeing the same routine path, and you're really not really focused. You're just looking at the dog. But to remind myself to look at something I don't usually see, to notice something that I haven't usually or noticed before. It can take 30 seconds. It's just a nice way of disengaging the mind from what was causing me stress, and to get back into the present moment of, actually, I'm here, I'm walking the dog, I'm out with nature. Everything can wait. I think that's the thing we often forget. Everything, like nothing, time is often the best. This too shall pass is one thing, but also, like, we think we have to answer things immediately. Usually it'll wait. We think it can't, because we're living in that heightened mode of anxiety and stress, but often it'll wait. Slow down to speed up sometimes. Sleep on it. Another cliche, sleep on it. Why do they say that? Because when you wake up in the morning, you'll probably feel differently about it. Your brain's had time to compartmentalize. Your brain's had time to figure a lot of stuff out. And you
I
wake
literally
up,
said that to someone
naturally feel
yesterday.
differently. Yeah.
I was having a discussion with someone who wants to do something, and I had the conversation with them to understand their needs and whatever else, and I said, okay, I feel like this will be my response, but I'm going to give you an actual response tomorrow, because I want to sleep on it, and I want to be able to kind of come to it fresh. But the other things, I'm just looking at the time, I'm conscious of time, but a couple of other things that I would say that I would use as stress relieving tactics. One would also be thinking back. So thinking back to a time when you've had a similar obstacle or similar challenge and overcome it, because that often gives me the confidence to then have the challenge that I'm going through and be satisfied with that. The other thing, and I think I did a video on this years ago on my YouTube channel, where we were talking about worry at the beginning of the show, is it's fine to worry, but what happens with a lot of worry for a lot of people is it's a small amount of worry that's spread out periodically throughout the day. So what I say is allocate yourself 5 or 10 minutes where all you got to do is worry. It's actually quite difficult to block out 5-10 minutes and worry for that entire 5 minutes, but just add what I call worry time. So just that's 5 minutes. I'm going to use all this time to worry about the thing, and then I'm not, which would
Take
probably
that slight level further, just because in the way that I work, I'll say to the people that work with me, like, the thing that's causing you the most worry, do first. Don't do it at the end of the day. Get it off, get it done, be proactive. 20 seconds of bravery or courage. Just get that thing done, because if you don't, it'll always be going on in the back of your mind, and that problem will be getting bigger. So if you have an opportunity to confront that worry and do something about it, don't hang around. Get it done now. Don't procrastinate. Make that the first thing you do on your to-do list the following day, and just get it done.
Mean, there's a great book that you could recommend to people read. I don't know if you've read this yourself or you're familiar with Brian Tracy. Are you familiar with Brian Tracy?
I'm familiar with Brian Tracy, yeah.
I love his work, and hopefully he's still around. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not, but he's got one of his books is Eat That Frog. Have you heard of Eat That Frog?
Yeah, I think I've got it on my bookshelf somewhere.
Yeah.
I think you actually recommended it. I think it's on your reading list.
It is on my reading list, but the premise for those people that are listening who are like, what's all this Eat That Frog business? It's like, if the worst thing you have to do in a day is eat a frog, which I don't really recommend, but anyway, the idea is just do that first, as Nick was saying. So if the worst thing is to eat the frog, you eat that frog, and then the rest of the day is going to be
easy.
Much easier.
It's a walk in the park.
Yeah. So I agree with that. The other thing I would say that ties into maybe worry time and everything is journaling, which I know that you'd be a fan of saying. Like, so right, because sometimes we worry and we can't really articulate what we're worried about or what we're anxious about, and then we realize when we start putting pen on paper that it doesn't really make sense. It's just like this weird sense or feeling, but actually when we write it down, either it doesn't make sense, or when you write it down on black and white, you can actually problem solve it a little bit better. So I would say journaling would be another one.
David Hare said a wonderful quote. He said, "The act of writing is the art of discovering what you believe." And it's totally true. If you start this, you write things down, and sometimes you'll realize the absurdity of the things you think you believe, and you'll correct them as you're writing. You go, actually, that's how we often think that the things we think in our minds is going to translate the same way on paper when you write them down, but we don't. It's almost like this hidden place where something translates and changes when we put it on pen to paper. So if you think there's no point journaling because I've got all my thoughts in my head and I'm just going to write the same things down anyway, you'll suddenly start to discover what really is causing you those problems, what it really is that you believe, because you'll write things down differently. I don't know why that happens, but maybe there's some science behind it. I don't know what that science is, but you definitely, if you start the process, you will journal, what you write will be different to what you think. And it's a really powerful way of doing things, for sure.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And then a couple of other ones before I say my last one, which we won't have time to go into, but I do recommend people look into in more detail. Maybe we can talk about it in a future episode. I think we've mentioned this one before in the past, which is heart math. I think we've talked about the Heart Math Institute. So that's a technique that people can look into using. So heart math, which is really about bringing awareness to your sensation, your feeling, regressing back to a time where you felt peaceful or calm, focusing on the area in your heart, and you breathe into your heart. I mean, you're breathing into your belly, but you imagine you're breathing in and out, like your mouth is almost on your heart, and then allowing a natural response to come up. And that's a very shortened version. I've done a very massive disservice to heart math, but I would look at heart math. And then the other thing I would look at as well, which I think you're familiar a little bit with, is EFT, or emotional freedom technique, which is effectively tapping or using meridian points to tap. It's a bit like acupuncture using your fingers. You
can get tapping meditations as well, can't you? For people that want to get into this, there's loads of tapping meditations.
And what's good with that is that it's not about avoiding the thing, because you often, when you're talking, you're talking as you're doing the tapping, but you're talking about the issue, or you're talking about the problem that's affecting you. So I'd say EFT is often really useful in the moment for a lot of people. So I think I've said nature, we've said sleep, we've said EFT, we've said food, breathwork, exercise, journaling, heart math, worry time, thinking back to a previous time. So they'll be
heightening our own awareness. I think it's important. There's one thing I'm going to add to this, only because of certainly the coaching clients I work with on a regular basis will often something that's at the bottom of all their stress, or something that's preventing them from overcoming it, is a lack of time. We say we haven't got the time to do the thing, which I had that example a moment ago where I didn't have time to do the meditation. I was too busy. So I think we need to be mindful of where we're losing our time. We've talked in the past about the things that energize us, the things that drain us. Get the things that drain you off your list. Don't just stop doing them, or find a way to outsource it if you can. There's a great book called Life Leverage, which talks about how to outsource your daily life and things to make your life better. So I won't go into that now because I think it's a whole episode in itself. But I do think people can do more to prioritize their tasks, to break things, big projects down into sizable chunks, getting the things we don't like, eating that frog, done first. There's loads of things we can do there. And also some of the things that worry us, if you're in a place where you just, you've got projects to deliver, you can set up a new business, or you've got something you need to say. I'm a big believer in the who, not the how. So don't get stuck in the how to do something. That's what makes us anxious. Instead, ask yourself, who can help me with this problem? Another cliche, a problem, I think, is a problem shared is a problem halved, or something along those lines. I think it goes. If I have a situation, let's say I wanted to get my first podcast off the ground and I was listening to this, and I knew Hari. Well, Hari does a show every week on Mindful Paths. I would give you a call and say that I'm anxious, and it just helps relieve some of that anxiety. So don't get caught up in the the how. Instead, focus on the who. Really, really helpful. Really helpful for time management as well. And if you have more time, they link it to something that's really important in your beat model. When you've got more time and you focus more on the who, not the how, it naturally brings in more human connection. So that will encourage me to speak to the who. And usually they're people we love and we treasure and we think are great in our lives for whatever reason. So we make those connections. When we connect with those people, there's more laughter and there's more play. And if you haven't got laughter and play and connection in your life, I think without those really fundamental things, you're naturally going to be more anxious and more stressed. We
Yeah,
need
and again, it's not
laughter.
about
We
them
need
that
play.
person
We need
solving the
connection.
problem. Like you say,
No.
when you share the problem, it's suddenly it's a load off. And I found that was really good actually. When I was in Colombia, one of the things I missed the most, and I said it to the guys, is just we were sitting around. We were all sharing an apartment at one point for a few weeks, and just like chewing chewing the fat, whatever, shooting the shit, whatever you call it. I can't remember. Just like having conversations around the table. It was like a bit like when you're back at uni or when you're house sharing for the first time, and you were able to talk to people about things that were going on. And I missed that, and that's what I said to them. I'm going to miss the most. It's not like the partying or the going out, doing all
Yeah.
this other stuff. It was like just being in the house, which I can only do for a certain amount of time, to be fair, because I need my own space as well. But being able to just have that conversation with someone at the end of the day, and I think also like with my mum being living with me, she's really missed that because she said like, the thing she's missing the most, or one of the things she's missing the most about being with my dad, obviously, is being able to share those problems and have those
Yeah, my mum's the
conversations
same.
with. Yeah, absolutely. And so me being here, it's really nice for her to be able to just talk about what she wants to talk about. And
And there's things we can do. Like, if you're listening to this now, have a think about who's the friend in your life that means a lot to you that you haven't spoken to in the last 6 months. Trust me, if any like there's quite a few of them that are out there. Go and have a conversation. Doesn't matter what you're stressed about. You don't have to go and share all your problems with them if you don't want to. It's just get that connection in. You'll find something to laugh about. You'll find something that you haven't spoken about. You'll reminisce about old times, whatever it is. Bring that in. You'll be amazed at how much of an impact that can have on your stress levels and your anxiety levels for sure. And I think it's really important. Which I should end on this note. Interesting fact. I got a time hop this week that told me that maybe it was a couple of days ago. Anyway, it was 25 years to the day that I started university with my best pals, and they were all on my time hop. And instantly, I got in touch with all of them. So a couple of them I haven't spoken to for a long time, and I was like, we started uni together in our halls of residence. At this moment, I said a little picture I had to go through my archives of my phone to find out these old pictures. But it did actually do exactly what I just mentioned. I got in touch with people I hadn't spoken to for way too long that I spent a really good proportion of my time with, and it just instantly brought happy memories back. And it's amazing how much that just helps, alleviate the troubles of the day. It's nice.
Yeah, it's great. It's actually been 25 years since I graduated university, not started university. I'm 4 years older than you, I think, mind you. But to end it on my last tip, which is probably my go-to stress management technique.
Go for it. Great place to finish.
And it's the most important one for me, beyond the breath work, beyond all the other things. You've actually mentioned it 3 or 4 times because you've mentioned it as something I mentioned, and it's this too shall pass. This too shall pass. Just knowing that anything that I'm going through right now is not going to last forever, because ultimately nothing lasts forever. And if you listen to our last episode where I talked about I think I talked about my Bufu experience and a little bit anyway, where I transcended reality anyway into different dimensions, and it was a crazy experience, but we won't go into it too much now. But nothing lasts forever, not even the universe. So that broken leg, that feeling rejection from breaking up with that person, that losing the potential work that I've got now, where I'm now not going to earn the money I thought I was going to earn during the next month. It's like, okay, am I going to still think like this in 6 months or 6 years time or 60 years time? Probably not. So let's not get caught up in it right now. I know there's immediate realities that you have to deal with, but I can deal with them a lot better when I'm not stressed about it. Yeah, I can deal with it a lot better when I'm not stressed. So this too shall pass is my main go-to strategy. And I think, okay, I've gone through stuff before. I'm going to go through things again. This is just a phase in my journey of life. And yes, I do need to deal with the immediacy of it, but also I'm going to deal with it a lot better when I'm not stressed. And just to know that it's not going to last forever helps like down-regulate that stress level for me.
It's going back to your mind could answer almost any question if you just learn to relax and wait for the answer. It'll come. I mean, if we're doing the favorite quotes, yours is "This too shall pass." I've said mine many times before, which is "Every feeling lives in the shadow of a thought." I'll let people ponder on that. Listen, Hari, I know hopefully you're feeling slightly better now than you did at the start of the show. Hey, we've had a little chat. You've reminded yourself.
I always feel good. I always feel good on these chats. It's always nice. And like you said about 5 minutes ago, sharing of an idea with another person immediately is gonna reduce those stress levels, and you're
100%.
doing, when you're talking, you're breathing, you're moving, you're doing things, so it's actually tying into a lot of the things we've talked about before.
I know that these conversations have helped each other just talk about our dads and different things as well. Even though we're doing it live on a show and people have listened and shared that, having the opportunity to talk about it in an open forum like this is great. And yeah, thank you for that, because you've certainly helped keep my anxiety and stress in check going, during a really difficult time for me. And hopefully I've done the same for you, and hopefully we're doing the same for our listeners. So Hari, absolute pleasure as always, my friend. I hope you negotiate the issues you've got to negotiate on your side, and look forward to connecting next time, bud.
Likewise. Take care, everybody, and do remember to like, share, subscribe, and do all the usual stuff.
And review. Give us a review. It really helps us grow the show. We want to grow the show. Thank you for those that have been watching on YouTube. Our views have gone through the roof last few, which is amazing. Please doing what you're doing because it's working. If you can do a review, that'd be amazing. But yeah, stay tuned. Watch us on whatever channel you enjoy the content, and we'll look forward to bringing you the next episode of Mindful Pass real soon.